So I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey that we went on, first starting with some of the successes we've had, and then some of the challenges that we faced. And I imagine that as all of you have gone on your own adoption journeys, you will have hit some of the same sort of snags that we have. So just from a start perspective, you know, we've had some really good success in picking up our top scenarios, our top risks. So we've been able to have workshops that we've gone across the company, brought in all the different stakeholders, had the very hard discussions about what's important and what's not important, and I can talk a little bit about that as well. We've also been able to take that information and began doing our own project prioritizations. I'll give you a really good example of this. One of the top scenarios that we thought was a top risk over the last couple of years had to do with fraudulent transactions on our SWIFT network. We move a ton of money every day, and sometimes in a given month we move like a lot of money. And so one of the perspectives is, you know, hey, if someone got into that network and was to move money like the Bangladeshi attacks that were over in the Asian banks, you know, that'd be a really bad thing. But as we started doing our analysis and kind of building out a risk registry, we realized that with the control strengths that we've put around because of the you know, everything that's gone with the SWIFT customer security program and all this stuff, that actually wasn't one of our top 5 risks anymore. The controls were just so good in and around that other things had peaked, had arisen to the top, and so it helped us make some really good prioritization decisions around what projects we needed to do ahead of that one. A lot of collaboration, and I think this is really important for the FAIR Institute. Is that, and I've talked to my folks who are working this. I want them to be reaching out to everybody within the FAIR Institute, other organizations that are championing this kind of work to learn. I think that's one of the most important parts of this. This is the community that's been built, and I feel like we've shared good lessons that we've had, but we've also just gotten a ton back. And I want to thank everybody in here who's talked with my team about that, because that's fantastic. And then the other factors, and this actually gets to some of the challenges that we've had as well, is beginning to work with those other groups within the organization that do risk-like activities as well. So obviously operational risk management, you know, they've got their own qualitative way of managing risk. And for us, it's figuring out how do we take what we're doing and layer it into the way that they're doing things as we're working to change their thinking on how to do things. And then also with our business continuity disaster recovery folks, redesigning their business impact analysis. So they're looking at the same kinds of losses that we're looking at. And that's getting a lot of traction right now. So they're changing the way that those BIAs are getting set up, collecting those primary and secondary losses. And I think that's going to help us immensely as we move a little bit forward. And then lastly, and this is one that I think is, I don't know if a lot of companies have this, but we have a model risk management process. And in order for you to have a model that you use for actually making decisions, it has to go through this entire process. So there's a bunch of math geeks that get together. They go through every bit of the model, looking for all of the potential issues that would arise. And we got it through there. So I thought that was really fantastic. It took about 6 months, I think, total, working with the Risk Lens folks and our model risk governance team to get that through there. This really sets us up because this is almost like putting the stamp of approval from our modeling organization to where we can actually start pushing this further across the organization. So let me get into the sort of challenges, one of our biggest challenges is actually getting the business data for our primary losses. And some of it is a function of our business. We're not a transactional business. So if we go down for 5 hours in an afternoon, typically what happens is the business just queues up, and then once everything's back online, it all goes through. And we can see that. It's measurable looking week over week and month over month, year over year. So that makes it a lot tougher. It also helps us explain away some of the SLAs from a BIA perspective, where the business wants to be always on, but at the same time you can actually explain and say, hey, well, wait a second, well, it doesn't really need to be always on. You just need to be back online within the next day or so. But it's a different expectation versus reality on how a business actually runs. And so that's been one of the more difficult things. I think the other piece is different types of incidents actually make money for us, which is strange, right? So we've had operational incidents, for instance, where we can't move money overnight, and then it just sits in an interest-bearing account overnight and we make money. Those are the best kinds of incidents, by the way. Yeah. So like the opportunity cost, maybe you can make a little bit more money, but that's something that's a little funky in the business sometimes that you have to try to take into account. The other piece that has been a really big challenge for us is the assumptions around control strength. I know when I was working on the Verizon data breach report for many years, that the holy grail for us was actually measuring control effectiveness. That was one of the whole reasons of doing that entire report, was figuring out, hey, what controls would actually be best instead of just focusing on best practices. What are the most effective controls? What are the controls that have the most efficacy together? And that's been a challenge for us as well. Not only just making sure that the controls that we believe are in place everywhere, but what level of effectiveness do they have against certain types of attacks? And so making sure that we have all of those, it's become too subjective, and we're trying to figure out how to make it more objective as we're doing all those different types of analysis. And then the last one here around this is seen a little bit as a science experiment as opposed to a risk management practice. I think a little bit about this is, how long it's been drawn out, how we've been doing more of a grassroots kind of approach to rolling it out. We've also had lots of changes within our enterprise risk management team, so that the people who I had gotten stakeholder support a couple of years ago, who have since left, it's rebuilding that sort of traction with them. So that they'll be behind this and they understand the value of it. We're getting there, we're working, but it is also seen as, oh, wait a second, well, I'm not sure I understand what your numbers are. I'm not sure that I believe them, and it's about making sure that those things are fully documented so that you can back up all of those, all of the data that you have. And so my top 3 tips, the first one, I think some of these echo what Steve had up here as well, is start small. Even the smallest amount of data, just collecting the information, start using the framework and how you speak about risk is actually really, really important. Really good example of this for me was just collecting simple information on your credit monitoring and notification. That immediately for a data breach becomes a lower bound loss, that you don't have to have anything else. You can just use that as a mechanism of talking about losses. We had a crown jewel application that had a critical vulnerability. This application was going to be retired in the next year, so they didn't want to fix it. They wanted to wait and just let it go through the next year. So I just calculated out, all right, well, if this was exploited and it's going to be, this range of losses, what I want you to do is go accept this risk in front of our technology risk committee, that it's going to be, between a $10 and $30 million loss. Are you good with that? And they got it fixed in 3 days. And it's just a matter of accountability when you start putting numbers people are much more accountable to it than if you just say this is high and red kind of aspect. As I mentioned just a moment ago, where we're getting the most traction is actually with our enterprise risk organization. They realize that operational risk management is one of the only areas within our company and a lot of companies out there that's not using a quantified risk approach. When it comes to credit loss and some of the other things, it's much more data, much more information that they can measure. Within operational risk, it's a lot tougher. And so they see this as a mechanism for them to get to where they want to someday. And I've gotten a lot of support from them, and I see a lot of their a lot of the education that's happening and the collaboration that's happening is between our groups and theirs. And then lastly, just document all of the assumptions. I think this was something else that Steve said earlier. Because once you have your data and you're showing these analyses and you show exactly how you got there, it's irrefutable typically. And that's the part of building trust with all of those folks within your organization, is once you have that trust and they start believing the numbers, you're going to go much further with it.